She asked it in a whisper, like the words might break if spoken too loudly. "Can you pretend to be my husband tonight?" The man she asked looked up from the hitching rail, surprised, not offended. He took her in slowly. The patched coat, the tired eyes, the way she stood slightly in front of the two small children behind her, as if her body alone could shield them from the world. "Just tonight," she added quickly. "The boarding house won't rent to a woman alone, and it's cold." He glanced toward the building behind her. Light spilled from the windows. Laughter drifted out, men's voices careless and loud. "I won't ask for anything," she said, shame creeping into her voice. "I just need a name to stand beside mine." He studied her face, looking for deceit. Found only fear, and pride trying hard not to crack. "All right," he said simply, "tonight." Her shoulders sagged with relief, so sudden it almost looked like pain. Inside, the keeper barely looked at them once he saw the man's confident posture and heard him say, "My wife's tired. We'll take the back room." The widow followed him upstairs, hands trembling. Once inside, she stopped short, panic flashing across her face. "I didn't mean I'll sleep on the floor, I swear. I just needed." "You'll take the bed," he said calmly. "The children too, I'll sit by the door." She stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged out of his coat. "Because you asked." That night she slept for the first time in weeks. Morning came soft and pale. When she woke, he was gone. Panic rose until she noticed breakfast laid out neatly, bread still warm, milk untouched. On the table sat a small pouch of coins. She rushed downstairs. He was there, speaking quietly with a stable hand. "You forgot this," she said, holding out the coins. He smiled faintly. "No, I didn't." "I can't take charity," she said, chin lifting. "It's not charity," he replied. "It's payment." "For what?" "For trusting me." She didn't know what to say to that. They parted ways at the road, no promises exchanged. She assumed she'd never see him again. She was wrong. Weeks later, desperate work led her to a distant ranch rumored to pay fair wages. The place was vast, rolling fields, solid fences, barns that spoke of careful hands and money earned, not flaunted. The foreman greeted her kindly. "You here for the position?" "Yes," she said nervously. "Good," he replied. "The owner likes to meet folks himself." Her breath caught when the man stepped onto the porch. Same calm eyes, same quiet presence. "You," she whispered. He smiled. "Looks like you found your way back." "You own this place?" she asked, stunned. "I do." Her face flushed. "I didn't know. I would never have asked if I—" "That's why I said yes," he interrupted gently. "You didn't know." She worked the ranch, hard, honest, never expecting more than she earned. But something changed. He watched the children learn to laugh again. She watched him soften in ways the land never had. One evening, months later, as the sun burned low and gold, she stood beside him at the fence. "That night," she said quietly, "I wasn't pretending." He nodded. "Neither was I." He didn't propose with grand words. He simply asked, "Do you still need someone to stand beside your name?" This time she answered without fear. "Yes." And the town would later whisper about how a poor widow married a rich rancher. But they missed the truth. She didn't marry wealth. She married a man who pretended to be her husband when she had nothing to offer, and never stopped being that man after she had everything to give. Life after that didn't suddenly turn easy, but it turned steady, and that was better. She didn't move into the big house right away. She stayed in the smaller workers' cottage with the children, insisting she earn her place the same way she always had. The rancher never argued. He'd learned that love doesn't grow by force, it grows by patience. The children followed him everywhere, at first cautiously, then boldly. One rode on the saddle in front of him, gripping his coat like it was the safest place on earth. The other waited every evening by the fence, watching for his silhouette against the setting sun. He never pretended not to notice. The town noticed too. Some said she'd planned it all, that no woman that poor could stumble into that kind of fortune by accident. Others said the rancher had lost his senses after too many years alone. Neither was true. What they couldn't see was how she balanced the books better than any clerk he'd hired before, how she remembered every worker's child by name, how the ranch ran smoother not because of money, but because of care. One winter, sickness came hard and fast. Workers fell ill, supplies ran low, fear crept in like cold through cracked walls. She took charge without asking permission. She organized shifts, rationed food fairly, sat through the night with the sick, and sent riders for help before pride could stop her. When the doctor finally arrived, he said the same thing to the rancher twice. "If she hadn't acted, you'd have buried half your men." That night the rancher found her asleep at the kitchen table, head resting on folded arms, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. He covered her with his coat. That spring he asked again, this time not quietly, not cautiously. "Stay," he said, "not as help, not as guest, as family." She met his eyes, and the children. "They already chose me," he replied. The wedding was simple, no lace, no speeches meant to impress, just vows spoken plainly, witnessed by people who had seen them both at their lowest. She kept her name. He insisted. Years passed. The ranch prospered, but more importantly, it became known as a place where widows were safe, children were fed, and no one was judged by the worst night of their life. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would tease him. "You know," she'd say, smiling, "you were supposed to pretend." He'd take her hand, thumb brushing over the scar on her knuckle from a life before him. "I never learned how," he'd answer. "Once I say I'm someone's husband, I mean it." And that was the truth people missed. The richest thing he ever owned wasn't land or cattle. It was the trust of a woman who asked a stranger to stand beside her for one night, and found a man who stayed for a lifetime. As the years settled in, the ranch stopped being known for its size or success. It became known for something quieter. People said, "If you're lost, go there." Not lost on the road, but lost in life. Widows came first, then men broken by war, then children with nowhere left to belong. No one was turned away the first night. Rules came later, kind ones, fair ones. She ran the house like a living thing, breathing around the people inside it. No one went hungry. No one was rushed into gratitude. She knew too well how dignity could bruise if handled carelessly. The rancher changed in ways money never could have taught him. He learned that leadership wasn't command, it was constancy. That strength could look like sitting quietly with a grieving man until dawn. That being rich didn't mean having more, it meant needing less. One winter evening, a storm stranded a wagon near the south fence. Inside were a man and a woman arguing in whispers sharp enough to wound. "She's not your responsibility," the man hissed. The rancher stepped in, voice calm. "On this land, anyone who arrives alive is my responsibility." The argument ended there. Later that night, the widow, his wife, stood beside him at the window, watching snow erase the road. "You didn't even ask who they were," she said. He smiled faintly. "Neither did you that night." She laughed softly, remembering, "I was terrified." "I was too," he admitted. "I just had more room to hide it." Years passed. The children grew tall, then grown. They left, returned, left again. Some brought families of their own. Some came back broken and healed slowly under that familiar roof. One evening, long after the house had quieted again, she asked him a question she'd held for years. "If I hadn't asked you that night, would you have helped me anyway?" He didn't answer right away. "I'd like to say yes," he said honestly, "but the truth is, You gave me permission to be the man I wanted to be." She rested her head on his shoulder. "That makes us even," she said. "You gave me permission to stop surviving." When age finally slowed him, she became his steady ground. When grief visited again, this time gently, they met it together, hand in hand. And when people told the story after they were gone, they always started with the question she'd asked. But the real story wasn't about pretending. It was about two people who needed one night of safety and found a lifetime of choosing each other instead. When the rancher finally passed, it wasn't sudden. It was like a long day ending exactly when it should. He was sitting on the porch, blanket over his knees, watching the fields go gold in the late sun. She was beside him, reading softly, not because he needed the words anymore, but because the sound of her voice had always been his favorite kind of silence. "Did we do it right?" he asked, eyes still on the horizon. She closed the book, took his hand. "We did it honestly." He smiled at that. That night, the lantern on the porch stayed lit until dawn. The widow, his wife, didn't leave the ranch. She couldn't. It wasn't just land anymore. It was memory, promise, and proof that kindness chosen once could echo for generations. People came to pay respects. Some cried. Some stood awkwardly, unsure how to mourn a man who had quietly changed their lives. She greeted each of them the same way, steady, composed, grateful, but unbowed. After the crowd faded, she walked the ranch alone. She stopped at the fence where she'd first seen him months after that night at the boarding house. She remembered how afraid she'd been, how small her world had felt, and how one simple question had opened it. Years later, when her hair was white and her steps slower, a young woman arrived with 2 children and the same fear in her eyes. "They won't rent to me," the girl whispered. "They say I need a husband." The old woman studied her gently. "Come inside," she said. "You don't need to pretend here." The girl hesitated. "But how will I repay you?" The old woman smiled, the same soft, knowing smile she'd worn for decades. "One day," she said, "you'll stand beside someone who needs safety. And you'll say yes." That was how the ranch lived on. Not through wealth, not through name, but through a promise passed hand to hand, night to night. No one should have to pretend to deserve shelter. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is ask.